Hello, I am Jordy Izzard, and I'm Associate Director of Alumni Relations at SAIS, and today's date is March 19th, 2014, and I am here today with Bart Fisher, who was in Bologna for a year, leaving in 1963, and earning his MA from SAIS in Washington in 1967, and later his Ph.D. from SAIS in 1970. And we're so happy to be here with you today, and we're just going to have a bit of a conversation. And why don't we just start with what originally brought you to SAIS?
I always wanted to go to Europe, and I wanted to study international affairs, and I wanted to study trade, in particular international trade. For whatever reason, I was always focused on trade. Being from St. Louis, it's a little odd, but I'd see riverboats going down the river barges and wonder where they were going. So I got interested in trade and wanted to pursue international affairs. And after I graduated Washington University in St. Louis, I applied to SAIS, and I got in. So it was mainly because of the economics program and the ability to study common market studies in Bologna, which at the time was unique.
That's
it was
great.
the first American graduate school in Europe. So it was the opportunity to be in an American graduate school, but be in Europe, and to focus on what at the time was a new development, the evolution of the common market. So
that's great.
I was very interested in that.
So tell us a little bit about your experience as a student in your various SAIS stints.
Well, Bologna was unforgettable. As I would tell anybody, it was the most enjoyable year of my life, best year of my life, very interesting. The great European professors. We had great European teachers such as Alfred Grosser, Federico Mancini, Jean-Baptiste de Rosel. We had the great men of the continent coming to Bologna, making the pilgrimage to Bologna to teach us callow Americans what was the truth about Europe. So it was a unique and great opportunity at a very tender age, I was 20 at the time, to learn all these things. And I had really never traveled away from St. Louis. So for me it was a brave new world. And I loved the Bologna experience, and they had a rule that all four people in the suites had to be of different nationalities. So 20% of the overall class was Americans, the rest were Europeans. So it was a great chance to meet many different types of Europeans, and it forced you to mix with the Europeans. You couldn't just stay with Americans. And of course Bologna, very few people in Bologna spoke English. It wasn't like going to Florence or Rome. You had more English speakers. You had to learn Italian to function and to date the girls.
And then you went to D.C. a few years later. And
I went to D.C. here at the School of International Studies in D.C. And by that time I was very, very focused on trade and international economics. And I had the good fortune to have an advisor, Dr. Isaiah Frank, who became my mentor basically through SAIS. Never failed. I'd go to his office and just look at a book, and he'd say, "Take it," and I'd walk out with the book. You know, he was that kind of person. Very giving, very nice, and a wonderful teacher. So that was a good experience.
That's great. And then you saw his son later, who talked about how you were talked about at the dinner table.
Yes,
yeah,
Dr.
nice.
Frank was very involved with his students and very interested in his students, and took a personal interest in his students. Took a personal interest in me and my career, and introduced me to many people, and recommended me for various scholarships and fellowships, which fortunately I got. But it was his guiding hand which carried me through the school, really, and developed my interest in international trade, which I then went on to become an international trade lawyer, starting in 1972, and with both my Ph.D. from SAIS and my Harvard Law degree, into this newly minted field called international trade. At that time, there were like 5 of us in town who were doing it here in D.C. It was a very exciting new field. And now, of course, every big firm has a trade department. It's become commoditized and difficult to enter. But at that time, I had the good fortune to have really the perfect background and training to go do trade law, which I've done to this day. That's
great. So tell us a little bit about that career trajectory. So you graduated with your Ph.D., went on to Harvard Law School.
Right.
And then in 72, you started your career as a trade lawyer. Tell us, international trade lawyer, tell us a little bit more about that.
What I did was I joined a very small law firm at the time named Patton Boggs. I was number 19 to join that firm, and now they grew to 600 lawyers. A great success story. The premier international lobbying firm, and it's a big lobbying political force in Washington, D.C. So I combined, I like a big joint degree, the SAIS Ph.D. and the Hopkins Harvard Law degree. focus on trade law. There was no trade department at the time. I was the first to do trade. Tommy Boggs was from New Orleans, a port town, seaport, and his father, Hale Boggs, had been majority leader in the House, and they were always advocates for free trade. So he wanted a trade department. So I grew it, and at that time I grew it to 30 lawyers, and then I left and more or less did my own thing. So I had 22 years at Patton Boggs, becoming head of the International Trade and Investment Department, and grew it to a pretty good size, and it's been very successful. So I was in the private practice of law. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I was teaching here at SAIS the course on regulation of international trade and investment, and I set up the Stanford SAIS Joint Degree Program, JDMA program, mm-hmm. and I patterned it on what Georgetown had. And Georgetown, they had the JDMS-FS program, and that was a wonderful program. I taught in that program too. I thought Hopkins students should have access to a good law school. So I combined with Stanford Law School, and that's been a very successful program. So that's been something I did at SAIS, and I was proud of. And it's, of course, very difficult to get in Stanford, so I've had the experience of some kids who could get in SAIS, but not Stanford. But if you can get in both, it's a great program. 4 years, you get both degrees. Mm-hmm. But what I did was I started the trade department, and I worked in different areas of trade law, like international trade negotiations, using my SAIS background, of course, for culture, how you deal with the Japanese, it's different than the Chinese, etc. And then I would do foreign market development to help U.S. companies sell their goods overseas. My biggest client was Mr. Mars, the person who made M&Ms. So I made the world safe for M&Ms. I got them into all kinds of countries all over the world, got rid of tariffs and non-tariff barriers on M&Ms.
Even the red dye ones?
Yeah, well, that was a great special problem in Japan, but we got past that. And then I did work at it's called regulatory international trade law. They call them dumping cases or import cases, trade regulation at the International Trade Commission in the Commerce Department. And I did customs work, and I did work in the common market, the European common market. I did work in Eastern Europe. I did work in China, and gradually became counsel to the government of China, their trade council in Washington. So I had an experience in trade law that I think is unparalleled in this town in terms of the diversity. I keep doing different things every day is a new experience, and I have a different experience every day, so I really love what I do. And I've literally never taken a vacation. And the reason is, everywhere I go is a vacation. I've traveled in the last 12 months to South Sudan, Nigeria, Nicaragua twice, England, Taiwan, China. I go all over the world, and I'm always moving. When I go, I'll take a day or two wherever as a vacation. But I don't really, I just like what I do. For me, staying home is a vacation. That's my base. But basically, I'm on the road.
And what time zone are you currently on?
I don't know. But I've enjoyed it, and I've used every bit of what I got at SAIS. The language, the cultural training, the economics, mm-hmm. And the sensitivities to dealing in foreign cultures. I mean, in trade, you have to know who you're dealing with and what's going to motivate them. I just had an experience, for example, in South Korea, where somebody lost face, and that became the determining factor in a negotiation. And you have to be aware of how far you can push people where they don't lose face. And mm-hmm. There are things you don't think of normally that you learn at SAIS. And its experience here has been very invaluable. And I'd say just as valuable as law school.
That's terrific.
And so at this point, I'm on my own. I have my own law firm. Brought my son into my law firm as of December 15th, Ross. And so it's my business model is I get cases and then I bring in other big firms. But I'm the quarterback. Every team has to have a quarterback.
That's excellent.
And this school, though, is unique. For foreign policy professionals, it's the best there is, I think. And it's certainly in the right location. Being in Washington, D.C. is where you've got to be. You're going to do this. And, of course, you have the run of the Homewood campus, too, if you're adventuresome, and you can go there and do things, mm-hmm. Learn from them. But being in Washington is key to this whole process. So my experience was very interesting. Coming right out of college, all I knew was I wanted to go to Europe. I had an interview with a guy who was dean named Francis O. Wilcox at the time, mm-hmm. a.k.a. Fowl, we used to call him. And he was a very august guy, had been U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And he was looking at my resume, and it's kind of boring after 20 minutes, and he said, I see at the bottom of your resume you were a tennis professional. I said, yeah, it's absolutely. And he said, I just can't get my serve right. And I said, really? What are you doing? And it's a stand-up. So I went through a service motion, and 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, I had a serve straightened out. Next thing I knew, I had a full scholarship to Bologna, and the rest is history.
On tennis, right? Yeah, exactly.
You never know what's going to
right.
get someone's attention on a resume.
That's right.
So it was great. And so then I was launched into this career of international law, basically. And I represent clients. Since the year 2000, I've represented 9 governments. And my practice essentially at this point is countries. I represent Sudan right now, the government of Sudan, which is very controversial, but it's interesting. I represented Israel and Dominican Republic and other countries, China and other countries. So, but it's training at SAIS has allowed me to do that. You know, the key to what I do in this town, it revolves around the embassies, because foreign countries all have embassies here, and then you get to know the ambassadors, and they get to know you, and then they take you to their home country to get representation. Because an ambassador comes here, he knows nothing, he doesn't know this town, and this is a village. You got to know how to go north by northwest, and so they need guidance. And you know, right now we're working with the Philippines and Sudan and a bunch of places that need help. You know, in this town to get U.S. assistance. So then on the trade side, either you're a protectionist or you're a free trader. I mean, that's interesting. And I've tried to be ACDC, be able to be a professional lawyer, and just so they don't know what's the next line out of my mouth.
Sure, yeah.
So just so it's like, Bart, what are you selling today? No, listen to me at least. So that's important in what I do. I go to Sudan twice a year. I'm going very soon again, and we're working out civil wars that are going on there, trying to straighten things out, get them off the sanctions list.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing at this
Well,
point.
that's great. And in thinking about, I mean, having gone through and continuing to sort of go through this tremendous career as an international trade lawyer, what advice for current SAIS students might you have today?
Joint degrees. You know, the world is more specialized than it ever was. You really need to have, I mean, why would someone call you to do anything? What's your expertise? What is your specialization? So I think my early insight was joint degrees. So I did a giant joint degree program with a Ph.D. here at SAIS and then Harvard Law degree, realizing that you need both. You need to have a specialization, and within that I did trade. So, and within trade you could do just customs. I mean, you know, things get very specialized, and I think you need to take, just while you're young and without breaks. I mean, I know students these days are taking the breaks after college, but I would just keep plowing through as much education as you can get with joint degrees and pile up the expertise. And it's, you've got to always ask yourself, what field is around the corner? You know, like, is it space law? Is it something new and different? And you have to, the world's always changing, so you have to look for the next new thing, the next new discipline, and become specialized. And then someone will have a reason to call you. I mean, literally right out of law school, I had clients because I had expertise. People in my own law firm had no clue what I was doing. I was just so well trained and specialized, and they didn't have those specializations. I said, well, Fisher's in Geneva, you know, and all they knew was the clients paid their bills. That's really all they cared about, which was fine with me. And I was very independent, literally from the day I graduated law school. So I actually had a specialization that I knew more about than almost anybody. That to me is the key, and I'd recommend that SAIS is part of an overall joint degree program. I'd say the 2-year MA at SAIS is fantastic, and then you go. You may go to law school, you may get your MBA. Of course, we have the joint degree program with Stanford in law, joint degree MBA with Wharton. I'm very big on these joint degree programs. I think that's what I would recommend. And within the law in particular, I'd recommend intellectual property, IP law. You know, technology is the key, patents, you know, take enough courses in engineering so you can become a patent lawyer and understand intellectual property, because these are the huge battles that are taking place in the law right now over who owns what.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for all you do to help the world.